medical school in a place called Pocklington on the Yorkshire Wolds, which is, I think, my favourite part of Yorkshire. I then went down to, what I've just gone to my CV bit here. How I got into this, I then went down to live in the Cotswolds, trained at Middlesex Hospital in London, was going to general practice eventually. And how I got into this, people who are not aware of it, I was like many people with this illness, very fit, young adult, late 20s, and never had any medical problems at all in my life. I caught a very nasty dose of chickenpox from one of my patients who had a nasty dose of shingles, and I had what was, in medical terms, an encephalitic component to this chickenpox. In other words, it affected my brain, particularly my balance mechanisms. But the chickenpox, like so many people who have experience of acute viral onset to their ME, the chickenpox went away and I was left with ME. And so I've been involved personally and professionally with this disease for almost 40 years, which is quite a long time. I'll go back to my little mini CV in a moment. Just to sort of outline on what we're going to do. This is going to be butter spread fairly thinly. I'm going to try and cover pretty briefly everything that's important that's going on at the moment. So it's not a detailed talk on management or research. I'm just trying and cover everything that's happening. And I think we can then discuss management issues, research issues, or whatever when we move on to questions and answers. If you've got something that's not clear as I go along, not a detailed question, but if it's something not clear, very simple, just either shout out or stick your hand up and we'll explain it as we go along. Just a little bit of extra bit of housekeeping. I brought some literature along with me. We've got, as you're probably aware, a vast amount of MEA literature. I think we know about 70 or 80 leaflets, booklets covering just about everything under the sun, from diagnosis to management of every symptom you can think of, the benefits, it's all there. So I brought a selection of our literature along. Caroline mentioned fibromyalgia. We've just got a new leaflet on the overlap between ME/CFS and fibromyalgia. Just 3 leaflets that I will mention during the talk. This is one you can download from the MEA website. It's a summary of our report, which is patient evidence on the benefits and adverse effects of CBT, graded exercise and pacing, and it's an important part of our submission to the NICE guideline process. This is a very useful letter. It's actually produced by the WorkWell Foundation in America. These are the academics that do the 2-day exercise test, which has a potential, I think, to be a diagnostic test, but it certainly helps confirm the post-exertional malaise component of this illness. One of these letters goes out with every copy now of our purple booklet, which again you're probably familiar with. It's a booklet, more than a booklet now, it's 150 pages, but it is a very much an evidence-based review of everything that's going on in the way of research, clinical assessment and management of this illness. So I've got some copies of those, but I'm quite happy to send 3 copies of those out to GPs if you let our office know the name and surgery of your GP, and if your GP would like a copy of this booklet, they will arrange to send it. And this letter, which is really very much emphasising the research that has gone on into looking at post-exertional malaise and the dangers of graded exercise, or certainly inappropriate graded exercise, that goes out as a covering letter to doctors who request a copy of that booklet. One other leaflet, again, this is downloadable from our website. It's my mic has gone to red, so, and it's gone very crackly. Does the IT man want to look at this?
We'll grab it.
Right, we'll grab it, okay. So this is a leaflet that I've done, which is one of my passions, which is the importance of trying to get people diagnosed early and accurately with this illness. And I gave a presentation to the annual conference of the Royal College of General Practitioners 2 weeks ago up in Glasgow. There were 1,500 general practitioners at this annual conference. We had a workshop on ME/CFS, and I'm pleased to say it was fully booked. We couldn't fit any more in, so we got 250 GPs into this meeting to hear myself talking about diagnosis, Dr. Gregor Purdy, who's a GP up in Scotland, talk about management, and my colleague Nigel Spates talked to the GPs about children and adolescents with ME/CFS. So that's just a quick rundown on some of the literature I may be referring to. Sorry, finally, there's another one here. I've only got 3 paper booklets of this. It is quite a thick tome, but it's a very useful tome. It's the largest survey that's ever been done on patient evidence in relation to every aspect of management of this illness under the sun, and it contains evidence from around about 4,000 patients who filled in an online survey 2 or 3 years ago. It is available to download free from the ME Association website, but I've brought a few paper copies of it along as well. So that's orthodox treatments, alternative treatments, non-drug treatments like CBT, graded exercise, pacing, etc. Okay, that's enough on literature. I say that's just a selection of literature. That's all free. You can just come and grab some copies, but I do have to charge for the purple booklets. Okay, my sort of mini CV, in addition to having personal professional involvement with this illness for 40 years, I've been medical advisor to the ME Association, probably for about 20 or so years. I was on the Medical Research Council's expert group on ME/CFS research, which, as you may recall, resulted in the production of a list of high priority research items, and then rather unusually for the Medical Research Council, £1.5 million of ring-fence funding for biomedical research, and 5 research studies emerged from that. The MRC then decided it was time to, as it were, close down the expert group, and that metamorphosed into what we call the UK CFS ME Research Collaborative, which I'll briefly talk about as we go along. I'm also a member of the what's called the Fluctuating Conditions Group, which is set up by the Department of Work and Pensions to provide input, particularly into Malcolm Harrington's reviews, independent reviews of the Employment Support Allowance, which took place a few years ago. And so our job was to look at ESA, work capability assessment, and to try and make things run more fair and effective, particularly for people with fluctuating conditions. We had some success, but we didn't achieve what we really wanted to do. But that's another matter. And I'm also a member, you're probably familiar with the Countess of Mar, and the Countess of Mar chairs a group of ME/CFS charities, national ME/CFS charities. We meet at the House of Lords, we meet every month or so. It's a very effective group now. We've been going now for about 10 years. In fact, we're having our 10-year lunch at the House of Lords next week to celebrate 10 years in existence. And the past years, I'll come on to one of the slides, we've been concentrating on trying to improve the education on this illness for all types of health professionals, not only doctors, but also medical students as well. Okay, what I'm going to talk about in this very brief and rapid sort of review is a little bit on research, go back to this subject of medical education, which I'm very passionate about and trying to get something done without improving it. Early and accurate diagnosis, which I say is another favourite topic of mine. A brief review on what we've got new in the way of management and the NICE guideline, politics, and finally what we can offer at the MEA. Okay, to start with research. A few words on the ME Biobank. The disappointment with the clinical trial in rituximab, which again I suspect you're familiar with now, the fact that the phase 3 trial in Norway, the one trial that everyone was hoping was going to produce some very positive results and would lead on to a UK trial. That trial didn't produce any positive results, and I think we may be at the end of the road as far as rituximab is concerned. The CMRC, we had a conference in Bristol, which I'll talk about, and on to other bits of research news. This is these are the tanks at the Royal Free Hospital in London, which is where all the blood samples for the MECFS biobank is stored. And if you're not familiar with the MECFS biobank, this is a unique and I think very important, very valuable piece of research infrastructure that we now have in the UK. The ME Association funds all the basic running costs of the MECFS biobank. I chair the steering group at Royal Free Hospital, which oversees the work of the biobank, and it has turned into, as I say, a very successful venture. So what happens at the biobank is that we collect blood samples from people with MECFS, and we have a cohort of people with severe MECFS. So we have a research nurse, Caroline Kingdom, who goes to people's homes to collect these blood samples. They're collected from certain specific sites in London and the South East because the samples, once they're collected, because of what we want to do with them and store them and make use of the material in them, they have to be transported from the point of collection to the Royal Free in a very short period of time, where they're processed and then they go into these storage tanks at very low temperatures. So we have 500, the precise breakdown is roughly, I think, now about 250 to 300 people with MECFS. We have this cohort also of people with multiple sclerosis that we're collecting from the neurology department at Charing Cross Hospital, because MS, you may be aware, has some very interesting clinical and possible pathological overlaps with MECFS. People with MS have a disabling fatigue, they have neurological symptoms which can coexist with people with ME, and we also have healthy controls. And these samples are then divided into, if you like, little tiny samples called aliquots. So we've got over 30,000 aliquots there now. And as biobanks go, we're part of the main University College London biobank at the Royal Free. And I think we are now the second largest or second most active biobank, sub-biobank within the UCL biobank. And over the past year or so, we've now reached the position where we have enough samples to start making these samples available to research groups, and research groups in the UK and abroad. Spain, we're sending samples to, we're sending samples to South America, and we're about to send samples to Israel, as well as researchers in the UK. So people can have, it just makes lab-based research so much easier and so much simpler, and also so much cheaper, because the samples are all there, the blood samples. You don't have to go and find the patients, you don't have to go and examine them and clinically assess them and everything there, because all the clinical data, which is anonymized, comes with the sample. So if you just want to do research on blood samples, abnormalities that you find in the blood, it's all there. You just ask us for the samples. We charge you something for them, but then you can get on and do the research. And we're very proud that 2 years ago, the National Institute of Health in America, which is the sort of equivalent to the Medical Research Council over there, awarded the biobank a grant of nearly $1.5 million to do a major research study, which is coming to an end now, looking at the virology and immunology of this illness. And the immunology research is now in its very final stages of being analysed. It's probably one of the most comprehensive studies on immune system function and dysfunction abnormalities in this illness. And this paper is being prepared, and I know it's going to have some very interesting results when it comes out. So look out for that when it appears. As I say, we've started releasing these samples, and not only are people doing research on the actual blood samples, but we've actually got people starting to do research on the anonymised clinical data. So you may have seen this paper. It was on the put it on the MEA website a few months ago, and this was a paper that looked in jargon what we call it functional status, the level of disability in people with MECFS versus this very nice control group of people we have with MS, and it demonstrated that the level of disability across a number of domains in people with MECFS was just as great as it was with people with multiple sclerosis. So that's an important bit of clinical data which makes, is useful from the campaigning point of view when you're trying to persuade politicians, research funding bodies that this is a serious and disabling illness. We keep getting asked, of course, can I donate blood samples to the biobank? When we need some more volunteers, then we make an announcement on the MEA website or Facebook page. We don't need any more volunteers at the moment, but we'll say when we do. But at the moment, because of this transport issue of having to get the samples from collection to the Royal Free very quickly, this is within certain restricted geographical areas, which is basically London and the South East at the moment. Then we have the Norwegian doctors who did the very interesting clinical trials on rituximab. As I mentioned a few months ago, it was very disappointing last year to hear that the phase 3 trial in Norway, which I think most of us were expecting positive results from, basically found no difference between the people who were treated with rituximab and those that weren't. So I think it's very difficult to see any further work coming out of this now. Certainly, we're not going to get a UK trial of rituximab. The results have not yet been published in a medical journal, so we still await information. It is possible that they feel that there may be a subgroup of people who will still respond to this, and perhaps some further work might be done to confirm their earlier results. That we'll have to wait and see. But the group have been remarkably quiet since announcing that basically the trial had failed, to provide any further information on what is happening there. So that's an interesting piece of unfinished work at the moment, but my feeling is that it's probably the end of the road for rituximab. There are certainly some other what we call disease-modifying drugs under investigation at the moment. As you will be aware, we don't have a drug which we can treat this illness with, like you can with arthritis and various other conditions. The use of drugs at the moment in this condition is largely to treat symptoms, and that's a major disappointment. What we want is obviously drugs which can treat the underlying disease process, which is why we need research to understand what's going wrong with the immune system, with the mitochondria, etc., etc. So there are certainly some promising targets from what we know about what appears to be the underlying disease process, but these are really in the very early stages of being looked at. It may be that dampening down the production of these inflammatory cytokines, these immune system chemicals that seem to be produced in larger amounts than they should be, or the body's immune system is not dampening down after the acute infection has occurred, and whether we can dampen down that part of the immune system response with other types of drugs that possibly lead to rituximab as a possibility. And then, of course, we have this research which is looking at defective energy production in this disease, and whether there's a defect within what we sort of call the Duracell batteries that sit inside your muscle cells, the mitochondria, and whether we can actually find where these chemical reactions are going wrong within the mitochondria and intervene with some sort of drug therapy there. So there are certainly things at the moment which are under investigation for as treatments for this illness, but we are some way off, I think, with effective forms of treatment aimed at the underlying disease process. You're probably aware of, as I mentioned it very briefly to start with, we now have, following on from the Medical Research Council's expert group, a body called the CFS ME Research Collaborative, the CFS and the CMRC. It's had a rocky and challenging ride to start with, if you followed the developments of the CMRC, but we've recently had some very big changes taking place, particularly in some of the personalities involved in this, and I think it is now a much more patient-friendly organisation. We have a new vice chairman, Professor Chris Ponting, from the University of Edinburgh, who's extremely patient-friendly. The Countess of Mar, on behalf of the Forward ME Group, has joined the board of the CMRC. We had a very successful two-day research conference in Bristol in mid-September. There is a report on that conference on the MEA website, where we had, I think, around about 100 doctors, research students, even medical students. We sponsored at the MEA 6 medical students to come along to that conference. And there was some very interesting, important research studies in relation to what we call genomics, metabolomics, proteomics. These are the new omics studies which are starting to help us unravel what is going on in the underlying cause of this illness. Metabolomics is the study of metabolites. These are chemicals which are produced when there are all kinds of reactions taking place in the body, and you can look at all these metabolic abnormalities and build up a picture of what may be happening at a cellular level, at a metabolic level. In proteomics, these are proteins that are produced when there are chemical reactions taking place. So you can again detect abnormal patterns there, which can help perhaps produce either diagnostic biomarkers or again help with the understanding of the underlying disease process and give you some clues as to what sort of drug treatments you might start to want to look at. Finally, on research, I'm involved with post-mortem research. I'm involved with a post-mortem tissue research group. We have a very good neuropathologist. This is a pathologist who just looks at post-mortem tissue at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, who works with us. And we do, from time to time, it's not a formal thing like the biobank, or we'd like to turn it into a formal research facility like the biobank, but when we do hear of a sad case of someone dying, and Megan Crofts is one sad example, which I'm sure many people here have heard about following the documentary, the BBC documentary last year on Megan. We are able to do post-mortems on people who died, and Megan, as you may remember, kindly donated her tissue to the post-mortem research unit in Addenbrooke's before she died. Second thing, just a brief word on to follow on what I've started talking about on medical education. This is an initiative which is largely being taken forward by the Forward ME group and the Countess of Mar. And over the past year, we've had a number of meetings with virtually everyone we can find that is concerned with medical education. So we've met with a senior person from the Medical Research Council, we've met with the President of the Royal College of General Practitioners, we've met with the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, we've met the Chief Social Worker for Children in England, and we are hoping to meet someone from what's called the Medical Schools Council, which is a body which oversees undergraduate medical school tuition. And as I know from doing several medical school meetings and presentations on this illness over the past year, there are a lot of medical schools around the UK where this is an almost non-existent subject on the curriculum. And that is a terrible situation. It was very enlightening when I came to Sheffield that we'd been invited by the medical school to come and give this talk. And it emerged talking to these medical students that very few of them had actually seen patients with ME. They appeared to have little or no medical education on this subject on their curriculum, and they were, like many other medical students, leaving medical school with no knowledge of this illness. And as I'm sure people are aware, the situation isn't that much better when it comes to qualified doctors. They're not receiving this education either. So we are hoping to meet someone from the Medical School Council before the end of the year. But in the meantime, we now have a lovely lady called Dr. Nina Muirhead. And if you go to the videos from the CMRC conference in September, there is a lovely video of Nina opening the CMRC conference. Nina is another doctor like myself. She's much younger than me. She's quite sure how old she is, but she's really quite young. She's had a very distinguished academic career. She's a dermatology oncologist at Oxford, but she's also involved in academic medical education at the University of Cardiff. And she has really got her teeth into trying to get something done at medical school level. So last week, I hope it went out last week, a questionnaire has gone out, which Nina has produced to all the medical schools in the UK, asking them what education on this illness is going on, whether the students are seeing patients, and what learning material that they have on this condition. So there's a number of initiatives taking place there. Another one that's taking place because she has a link with Cardiff University Medical School is that she's developing an e-learning module for medical students at Cardiff, and if that's successful as a pilot thing, we might be able to roll that out across the country. So those are the people that we've been seeing at the House of Lords and telling them to get on and do something about medical education in their own particular areas. We've had a particularly successful meeting with Professor Camilla Hawthorne, who's the President of the Royal College of General Practitioners in relation to medical education. And as a result of that, she asked us, which I set about doing, with the help of the rest of the group, a review article for the main GP journal, which is called GP Frontline, so that is due to appear, I hope, fairly shortly. So that's all the basics on diagnosis and management for GPs in primary care. And then she said, would you like to do a workshop on MECFS at our annual conference in Glasgow, which took place 2 weeks ago? This is a 3-day conference. It's not a good week to go and see a GP, because I think there were about 1,500 GPs there in Glasgow for this conference. But we got a slot there. We could have done with a bigger room, because the room we had, I think they thought 250 would be enough, and they probably wouldn't fill it. But in actual fact, we were fully booked, so we couldn't let everyone in. So we had 250 GPs came along to this workshop, which I did with Dr. Gregor Purdy, who's a GP from Dumfriesshire, and Nigel Spate, who's our paediatric medical advisor at the ME Association. It went very well, lots of very positive feedback. We also had a stand at this conference, 2-day stand, which was manned by volunteers from the Ford ME group. And so we had a lot of GPs coming along to that stand over a period of 2 days and asking questions and taking away literature. So I think that, from the point of view of general practice, was very productive. Where I think we've now got to do some work is on other health professionals, because sadly the extent of knowledge about this illness amongst nurses, occupational therapists, physiotherapists can be really pretty dire. And quite often the danger there is that, particularly in an area like physiotherapy, someone just dabbles in it, then they read the nice guideline, you get referred to a physiotherapist who knows really nothing about this, and you get a totally inappropriate piece of advice on activity management. Thirdly, early and accurate diagnosis. As I already mentioned, this is a passion of mine, trying to get people diagnosed early and accurately, because it is so frustrating when, I didn't bring it along, I shouldn't have done. We do have some good points in the NICE guideline, and we also made this point in the 2002 Chief Medical Officer's report, that we really ought to be getting people diagnosed, especially the acute viral onset people. So with children, this should be done within 3 months of onset of symptoms, and with adults it's 4 months from onset of symptoms. And the same point made by NICE, made in our own guidelines, it's made in our literature there for doctors, but it's just not getting through. Our most recent survey, website survey on how long did it take you to get a diagnosis, I think it was less than 16% of people were being diagnosed within 6 months. And over 50% were waiting over a year before they got a diagnosis. And at the other end is this whole issue of not getting an accurate diagnosis. So we know from data analysis, which has been done by Professor Julian Newton, from people attending their specialist service in Newcastle, and the abstract is in the purple book there, it's also in the leaflet, when they analysed the people who were being referred to Newcastle for further help with either diagnosis or management, it turned out that 40% of the people being sent to Newcastle didn't have a diagnosis of MECFS. A lot of them had another medical condition, and it was around about 40%. They've got a neurological problem, a connective tissue disease, an autoimmune disease. There was around about 15% had a psychiatric disorder, about 20% had a primary sleep disorder like sleep apnea, 5% I think it was had a cardiac or respiratory condition, and then about another 15% they just couldn't get to the bottom of why they had ME/CFS-like symptoms. But only 60% of those people actually had a diagnosis of what we would call ME/CFS. So this whole issue of diagnostic criteria, early diagnosis, accurate diagnosis, and I'm sure it will be, should really be a very key part of the NICE guideline rewrite. I'm not going to talk a lot about management of symptoms. I'm really going to leave this till question time. But really, just to summarise that, this is where I think doctors can intervene with drug treatment in certain appropriate cases. And this is the best way in which doctors can manage this illness at the moment, in addition to activity management. So there are certainly things we can do for pain, for sleep disturbance, for what we call autonomic nervous system dysfunction. This is when the thermostat within the brain is not controlling the way your pulse and blood pressure operates, particularly when you change from lying or sitting to a standing position. The blood pressure falls, the pulse rate may rise quite rapidly, which is what POTS is, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So it's this control of pulse, blood pressure, and the size of the blood pressure, the size of the blood vessels, is all tied up with this, what we call the autonomic nervous system. This is the part of the nervous system that controls blood vessel size and pulse and blood pressure. So it produces these symptoms. Orthostatic intolerance, incidentally, for anyone who doesn't understand what orthostatic intolerance is, it's the way doctors describe having a problem with maintaining prolonged standing position. And that is probably largely due to the fact that when you stand up, a lot of your blood volume then goes downwards, and if too much of it goes downwards and not enough is going upwards, then you're not going to maintain what's going on in the brain, so you get cognitive dysfunction, you feel faint, sweating, and everything that goes with it. And it may also help to explain why quite a lot of people with this illness have problems with what we call thermoregulation, and that's control of responding to heat. So people are very sensitive to high temperatures, low temperatures. They may be hot when it's cold when it's hot. While they're very, very fatigued, you can get out of a hot bath, for instance. So your body temperature regulation is up to treat as well. Bowel symptoms, there's a considerable overlap between this illness and people who have irritable bowel type symptomatology. Premenstrual exacerbation of symptoms is an interesting one. I haven't brought the leaflet along with me, but over the years it's been interesting to know how many people, especially when I take a clinical history from people with this illness, will describe how they get a premenstrual or menstrual exacerbation of their symptoms. And we know that there is premenstrual disorder, premenstrual tension, whatever. And it seems, certainly from our surveys, that this is a common problem in people with ME/CFS, quite a proportion of ladies with ME/CFS. And we've just produced a new leaflet. I've just done a new leaflet on that particular subject. As I say, it's not with me now, but it's in our magazine, which is about to come out, and it's also available on the website. So, as I say, we've got lots and lots of literature if you want to make use of any of our literature on all these different symptoms. As far as management is concerned, I think this issue of activity management, getting the balance between rest and relaxation and activity, whether it's mental activity, physical activity, or emotional activity, is probably the most important aspect of management. And if you don't get that right, I mean, that is really one crucial building block for making some sort of improvement or recovery which is just going to be missing. And as I'm sure everyone's aware, the approach that we recommend, the approach that the vast majority of people with this illness find helpful is pacing, which is basically balancing rest and activity in accordance with what you feel you are capable of doing. And ideally, you keep going on and doing little steps, little bits of physical, little bits of mental activity, increasing them perhaps day by day, week by week, but then cutting down when you're not doing so well. The form of activity management, unfortunately, that is still recommended by NICE and basically the medical profession, I suppose, is graded exercise therapy. And without going into a sort of great long lecture on graded exercise therapy, the PACE trial and everything else that goes with it, and I'll avoid doing that because you've got David Toller, whom I know very well, and is coming next week, and has gone into this in tremendous detail. So I'll leave that largely to David. But the problem here is that despite all of this patient evidence, and as I say, this is the most comprehensive patient evidence from our own survey is summarised there in that leaflet there, which you can have a copy of or download. The patient evidence on graded exercise is really quite damning. Sorry? Oh, sorry. It's my microphone, maybe sort of intermittent. It's got a red light on, and it's not doing itself properly. So the patient evidence on graded exercise is really quite damning. And I mean, all the reports that we've done, the surveys we've done, have found that around about 50% of people or more report that they are worse following graded exercise. And we also now, of course, have research evidence coming through which supports the fact that this type of approach, which is basically based on the theory that everything that is going wrong in ME/CFS from the mobility point of view is related to deconditioning, is just not true. That there are problems both at what we call the central level, the way your brain functions, and also the way your muscles function and the mitochondria, which I mentioned earlier, which are preventing people from exercising and gradually increasing, progressively increasing the amount of exercise that they're doing. But despite all that, we have tried to persuade NICE without success at the moment that the recommendation in this guideline on graded exercise as virtually an automatic recommendation for everyone with mild or moderate ME/CFS should be dropped. And NICE have, I think, well, they've certainly been very reluctant to do that. And I suspect that that is going to be the case until this new guideline is actually produced and is published in October 2020. So until we can persuade the Lancet and the other medical journals to carry out an independent analysis of the results, which we are now querying following the release of the unpublished data and this Freedom of Information Tribunal, I think unless we can get something like that done, it is going to be a real uphill struggle to get NICE to change their mind on the current guideline on GPT. I think there's a much bigger chance that something's going to happen when we get a new NICE guideline. Third strand of management, which is of course terribly important, is things which can help to improve people's quality of life. And obviously we talked a little bit about benefits in the introduction. We have got, in case you're not aware, we've got some very comprehensive literature on how to fill in your ESA and PIP application forms, because filling these forms in correctly is a very important thing if you're going to increase your chances of having a successful application. We had a very good workshop at the CMRC conference on diet and nutrition. I'm not quite sure whether we're going to be able to publish that in due course with all the other conference reports, but I hope we are going to be able to do so. Education and employment, again, very important parts of management, whether it's people at school or people in work, getting things right where they can still able to continue with our education and employment. I'm quite happy to come back to those issues during questions, but we do incidentally have the new MEA called a leaflet, if you want to sort of technical booklet, on all kinds of employment issues in relation to MECFS, and it's been partly written by a lawyer who works with employment law, so it covers the various legal things. And we've also got a new leaflet on MECFS and university students for people at university. A few quick points on DSA benefits. As I say, we've just updated our leaflets on filling in the ESA and PIP forms. We've been also, the Forward ME group, having some meetings with particularly people from Capita who carry out the medical assessments. And we met with Dr. Ian Gargan, who's the Chief Medical Officer at Capita, to discuss the problems that people come to us as a charity with in relation to their DWP medical assessments. There are minutes for those meetings and summaries for those meetings on the MEA website. But if you are having those sort of problems, it's worth having a look at those meetings, because he does make some very important points of what should actually be happening at these sort of assessments, and where things go wrong, and what remedies are available if you feel something's gone wrong. As I'm sure anyone who's involved in ESA and PAP should know, but just in case you are not fully up to speed with this, these words are terribly, terribly important. You must be able to do these tasks that you're asked about reliably, repeatedly, safely, and that means to you and to others, and in a timely manner. The DWP don't always emphasise this fact, but this is established in the DWP. So if you're asked about something, whether it's lifting, mobility, taking part in whatever task you're being asked about, you should be able to, it should be based on being able to fulfill that sort of requirement. And finally, a note on appeals. The success rate on appeal, I would always advise anyone with any CFS who's been turned down initially to go on appeal, because we know that the success rate on appeal for benefit refusals in this illness is really quite high. But if you are going to appeal, it significantly increases your chances of winning an appeal if you go and turn up in person, and that you provide good supportive medical evidence from anyone who's involved in your care. And that's not just health professionals, it could be care assistants, anyone who is involved in your care. Good written supportive evidence. I think the final strand on management, as we've been talking about, this publication, the 2007 NICE guideline on MECFS with all its faults, is going to be replaced. You may recall that last year there was a review of this guideline, an internal review of the guideline by NICE. NICE internally decided that the guideline was fine, it didn't need reviewing, updating or anything else, and it could be left on the shelf. There was not surprisingly an outcry from many sections of the patient community. We at the MEA organised a petition to NICE to ask them to either update or revise or rewrite the guideline. We got, I think, around about 15,000 signatures in just over 2 weeks. And I think largely as a result of that petition, because I don't think NICE have ever had a petition like that in their history, there was a change of mind, and NICE decided that they would review the guideline. And it's not only going to be a review, if you've been following this, it is going to be a complete rewrite of the NICE guideline on MECFS. That's the good news. The bad news is that a rewrite of the guideline means starting from scratch, and that means going back to square one, which means going through the whole NICE bureaucratic process of producing a new guideline, which takes 3 years. So for the first year, which we're almost sort of starting to come up to, we have been going through a scoping exercise as to what the guideline is going to cover and not going to cover. You can follow what's been happening with the scoping exercise on the MEA website if you're interested. The guideline chairman, the committee members are in the process of being appointed. I've got to be careful what I say here, because I have applied to to join the professional part of the guideline committee. Some appointments have now been made. I think all the patient appointments have been made. There are some names as far as doctors who have been appointed. One of my colleagues at the Biobank, Dr. Lewis Knackall, has been appointed as one of the professional members. So the guideline group is now being put together, and the next stage is for the guideline group to then meet, and then the evidence gathering process will start. So they will review all the published clinical trials, which is what they regard as the gold standard of evidence. These are results of trials that have been published in the medical journals. But also this time round, we very much get the impression from our meetings with NICE that what is called patient evidence will also be taken into account. So these were the sort of surveys that we've been producing on graded exercise and CBT and pacing. So we will be submitting that form of patient evidence. And I think if you, as a group, have got any good patient evidence to submit, then that's something you could do as well when the time comes. So next year, the group will be meeting. I think they'll probably, these sort of groups meet every month or so. They look at what's coming in the way of evidence. The evidence is all analysed by academics to give pointers to what is good quality evidence, poor quality evidence, etc., etc. And then the process of writing the guidelines starts. That's done by a professional team at NICE. It's not actually done by the members of the group themselves. And then the drafts are looked at, and then they go back to the stakeholders. And I don't know whether Sheffield ME Group is a stakeholder in the NICE guideline. If it is, then you obviously have some input into it. If you're not a stakeholder, then get registered as a stakeholder, because it gives you the opportunity to come to these meetings and comment on the drafts as they go along. And then finally, towards the end of 2020, and the aim is to publish this new guideline in October 2020. We reach the point where a new guideline is produced. So that is October 2020. That's, I think, just about everything I've covered just now. It's the process of producing a NICE guideline, and let us hope that the new guideline is fit for purpose and is going to be actually helpful to people with MECFS. Finally, on management, I think, as I already mentioned, I brought you copies of the new edition of the MEA Total Book that I write. So they are here. As I say, we can send those to your doctor. That's the MEA management. I've only got 3 of those, but they're free while they're there. You can download them from the website. Please take any of the literature that's there. That's all free. That's the purple book. Looking at the time, about 2 minutes over. Finally, I think it's about quick note on parliamentary matters. As you may be aware, we used to have an all-party parliamentary group on ME. Unfortunately, we could not get enough MPs sufficiently interested to take on the officer positions and maintain the momentum of the APPG. So reluctantly, the APPG has gone into storage at the moment. It could be renewed if there is sufficient interest. And what we are concentrating on doing, which I think is a far more effective process at the moment, is working with some individual MPs who are keen to help us. And in particular, I'm sure you're all aware of Carol Monaghan, who's an SNP member at Westminster. Carol is absolutely amazing, and she has done tremendous work in trying to get things moving at Westminster in the House of Commons. She's secured 2 Westminster Hall debates. These are debates not actually within the House of Commons chamber, but they are hour-long debates in separate chambers outside the Commons. We had one on the PACE trial earlier last year, and we've also had one this year, which was a more general debate, which was very well attended. I think we got about 50 or 60 MPs there on a Thursday afternoon. Thursday afternoon is not the best day to try and get a group of MPs together, because they're all fleeing off back to their constituencies. So Carol's doing an amazing job, and she is, I think, reasonably confident that before long, and possibly even before the end of this year, we can get a full chamber debate on this illness at Westminster. Some of the other things we're dealing with at the Forward NE group at the moment is following the politics of the World Health Organization. You may be aware that what we call ICD-10 is the International Classification of Diseases, where NECFS is recognised as a neurological disease. Its status within ICD-11 is under discussion at the moment, and we're making quite a lot of input to that. And there are talk as to whether it could move to a musculoskeletal or another classification, but we are trying to keep it there as a neurological disease. There is also some worrying suggestions, because there is a sort of equivalent of ICD-10 for primary care, and there is a suggestion that NECFS could move into a category of what is known as bodily stress syndrome, and that is not a good route to follow. So we're keeping a close eye on that and hopefully trying to prevent things moving in the wrong way there. This is finally any association. So we've got a website, we've got telephone information support service if you want to give us a ring. It's supervised incidentally by a wonderful lady who lives out in the Peak District, not far from where we are now. Our literature list is on the website. We've got a Facebook page which is very active, where everything on discussion is going on all the time. And right, I'm a few minutes over time. Thank you. That's the end of what I was going to say. I think we're all going to have a break now for about half an hour, and then we'll come back and do questions. Right, okay, thank you.
Shepherd for that absolutely kind of fascinating, incredible kind of run through of a very, very broad and complex area. It is time for a break now, as was said. This event today is supported by the People's Health Trust, and one of the things we're required to do is to gather just some information about the audience and some feedback from you. So I think everybody should have a feedback form. If you've not, then we've got them at the main desk. Could you, before you leave today, could you please, we'd be very, very grateful if you could fill in the feedback form. They're anonymous, we just need to know your postcode and then some questions and thoughts. So we'd really, really appreciate your feedback. So please enjoy the buffet and the break. Please enjoy the conversation with each other, and then we'll be back at 5 to 4 for a question and answer session. And if anybody doesn't want to ask a question publicly but wants to come and tell me the question or write it down, please feel free to do so. Thank you.
Right, I'm going to hang on here with the purple box and the list.
Suey top.
Sorry, purple books are £8. Yes. No, I haven't got seats.
Do you know if the purple books can be sent to paediatricians as well as GPs?
Yes, you've got the last one. It is on the website. Yeah, thank you.